It is a real privilege to get to be here tonight. As was mentioned, I run an organization called Apologetics Canada. It's a ministry that my wife and I felt led to start in 2010. And actually, the genesis of that organization has a lot to do with what I want to talk with you about tonight. Tonight's topic is Why Church? Answering Jesus' call to life in community. In about 2008, 2009, I was in Los Angeles completing my master's degree at Biola University. And I began to hear some startling statistics of young people that were leaving the faith. Shortly after, in about 2015, Pew Research put out some stats that for every one person coming to faith, 4 were leaving the faith. But we were seeing this back in 2008, 2009, this mass exodus, if you will, of young people from the church. And today we'll often use, various buzzwords like deconstruction and those sorts of things. And I remember thinking, what are we doing as a church? What are we doing to address the questions that young people have? The questions that people in general have? How are we doing at helping people find faith? But also, what are we doing to help people remain in the faith? It's an important question that we need to give thought to, particularly when we think about what the church is and what we're doing here. I think as I look back over my life, there's a situation in particular, there's this moment that I had, one of the more awkward moments of my life that I think is kind of reflective, I'd say, about where we're at currently in this moment. I did my PhD in the area of ontology, theological anthropology. It was just kind of a smorgasbord of different topics. Under studying one guy in particular by the name of Michael Polanyi. So if there's any Polanyi nerds here, you can come talk to me afterwards. But Polanyi was an interesting character because he was this scientist that got concerned with the philosophies driving science in the 1940s, and he went into philosophy, and as he got into philosophy and started grounding himself in a better philosophy, found himself in theology. And so in the field of study that I was going into, it attracted just an eclectic group of people. And I never was quite sure who I was talking to at any given moment. Was I talking to somebody more from the science background, from a philosophy, or theology? And I remember one time in particular, I was at this academic conference, and I was sitting in beside this one gentleman, and it was one of those moments where I thought, okay, I've definitely got to be with a theology guy today. Because as I asked him what he did, and he was a teacher, and I asked him what he taught. And he said, well, my favorite class is C.S. Lewis. And I'm thinking, okay, we got a Christian here. We must. And he said he'd spent his whole life teaching C.S. Lewis. And I looked at him and I asked him, and I go, are you a Christian? And he had this look on his face of like disgust. And he said, why on earth would you ask me that? And I thought, okay, let me just back up again. Are we talking about Clive Staples Lewis? Like, are we talking about C.S. Lewis, right? Like, what books did you read of his? And he proceeded to tell me that his favorite books were Mere Christianity and The Abolition of Man. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know if you've ever had one of those moments where you're like, hey, this is awkward, but it's so interesting, I must dig deeper, and I know this is going to go bad. Okay, so I grabbed the shovel, and I decided I'm going to go deeper here. And I go, so do you believe in God? And at this moment, you could tell, like, everybody stopped what they were doing, and, like, all eyes, like, turned and watched this conversation. His wife was there, too. And her face distorted as much as his face over this question. And he said this, I'm not making this up. He said, what on earth does God have anything to do with C.S. Lewis? And I'm just like, what? As I proceeded to talk with this guy, it became very clear that he studied Lewis purely academically. He studied him as a writer, his cultural context, He studied him, by his prose, literarily, and all those other, but he did not see the big picture. He missed what Lewis was talking about. He missed the crux of what C.S. Lewis was all about. God, Christianity. He didn't see him as an apologist at all. And as I think about that interaction that I had that day with that gentleman, it reminds me of my time in church ministry. I pastored for 20 years. Many of those were with the MB conference. I love the MBs dearly. I am an American, though, by the way, I must say. So when I came up to Canada and heard about these Mennonites, I was expecting horse and buggy. It's true. And instead, I found good food, and I never left. But when I started pastoring, I honestly, I couldn't believe a question that I received over and over again. And so when I was asked to come speak tonight, and thank you for coming, and they told me, we want you to speak on the topic of why church, I said, absolutely, I would love to speak on that topic because the church needs to think a lot more about this question and how we're communicating what the answer is to that question. Because as I pastored, I can't tell you the number of times I was asked that. Why church? And I remember distinctly one day coming to church, and I would get this question over and over again as somebody came up to me, often young people, and they would say, does a Christian need to go to church? Have you ever got that? Does a Christian need to go to church? And I'm telling you, the way that I react to that is the same way I react to somebody that is reading C.S. Lewis and doesn't realize that he is about God and about Christianity. You have clearly missed the boat. You are not seeing the big picture that church and Christianity go together, and you really aren't appreciating what Jesus has to say, what he is communicating, and what all of this is about. There's a lot of us that are really confused about what church is. And as I'm going to get into a bit, if I were to be honest, there have been times that I too have been confused about what church is. And as I think about this question and how people have wrestled with it over the years, I am reminded of a blog post that I read a number of years ago by Donald Miller. And I want to read this for you. The blog post is called Why I Don't Attend Church Regularly. And I want to just state right from the beginning, I am not reading Miller's blog because I want to beat up on Miller or he's going to be tonight's whipping boy. That is not what I'm doing. I actually appreciate Donald Miller's honesty. And if you're forgetting who he is, he's an author who wrote popular books such as Blue Like Jazz and Searching for God Knows What. And he does a really good job, I think, at articulating what a lot of people in our churches, and maybe even many of us, are feeling or have felt. Notice what he says. He says, I have a confession. I don't connect with God by singing to him. Not at all. I know I'm nearly alone in this, but it's true. I was finally able to admit this recently when I attended a church service that had perhaps the most talented worship team I've ever heard. Now, Miller, like me, is from Portland, Oregon. I know exactly what church he's talking about. And they do. They have an amazing worship team. I loved their music, but I loved it more for the music than the worship. As far as connecting with God goes, I wasn't feeling much of anything. I used to feel guilty about this, but to be honest, I experienced an intimacy with God I consider strong and healthy. It's just that I don't experience that intimacy in a traditional worship service. In fact, I can count on one hand the number of sermons I actually remember. Now, Mark, I can remember more than a handful of your sermons, okay? I attend here at Northview. I love this church dearly. So to be brutally honest, I don't learn much about God hearing a sermon, and I don't connect with him by singing songs to him. So like most men, a traditional church service can be somewhat long and difficult to get through. Now, to be fair to Miller, it is really easy to come away from church believing that worship singing and hearing a sermon is what church is all about. Now, follow me here. The challenge, of course, is that you don't need to go to church to get great worship or great preaching. You can use Spotify for that to get some good worship, and you can go on to podcasts and get some great preaching. So as you can imagine, a lot of people ask, why church? Technology has made all of those things easily accessible at our fingertips. Miller goes on to write in his blog, he says, how do I find intimacy with God if not through a traditional church model? The answer came to me recently, and it was a freeing revelation. I connect with God by working. I literally feel an intimacy with God when I build my company. So do I attend church? Not often, to be honest. Like I said, it's not how I learn. I worship God every day through my work. It's a blast. I think there's a lot of people that resonate with that. They are not sure what church is, and if you were to press them on what it is, they would probably say it's where people go to sing songs and listen to sermons. But is that what it is? Is that what we're about? There's a lot of people who kind of use that colloquial phrase, that's my church. We kind of have that idea that church is whatever inspires you. You like hiking? That's your church. You like art? That's your church. You like music, concerts, symphonies? That's your church. What is it that inspires you? But I mean, is that what church is? What I want to do this evening is, instead of taking a deep dive into one particular passage and exploring it, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to read for you a series of passages where Jesus is talking about what church is. And one of the things that you will notice about Jesus when he talks about church is he takes the gloves off. Jesus doesn't hold back his punches when it comes to church. And the reason is, and I just want you to be seeing this as we read, the reason is because identity is at the foundation of what Jesus is challenging, as he is wanting to get you and I to rethink our identity. And the problem is, though, is we're stubborn. We're not easy to change the way that we view the world, the way that we view ourselves, the way that we view others, and Jesus comes out swinging. Mark chapter 3, verses 31 to 35. When Jesus' mother and brother had arrived, and Jesus was in this house full of people preaching, standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, your mother and your brothers are outside looking for you. Who are my mother and my brothers? He asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother. Mark 10, 28 to 30. Then Peter spoke up, we have left everything to follow you. Truly, I tell you, Jesus replied, no one who has left home or brother or sister or mother or father or children or fields for me and the gospel will fail to receive 100 times as much in the present age. Now, what is Jesus getting after? What's the identity that he wants to reorient them to? What does he mean when he says that you will have homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and fields? He's talking about family. Family. Along with persecution, and in the age to come, eternal life. Notice this again in Matthew 8, 19 to 22. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. Jesus replied, foxes have dens, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Another disciple said to him, Lord, first let me go bury my father. But Jesus told him, follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. Matthew 10, 34 to 39. Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against his mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for me and my sake will find it. Jesus is challenging our identity. What are you going to root or build the foundation of who you are on? Now, as you can imagine, as the disciples, as the Jews are hearing Jesus preach like this, they are confused. And always, by the way, a good thing to always do when you're hearing Jesus and he starts getting really spicy, you should be thinking, is he quoting scripture? Because he often is. And that's exactly what he's doing here in Matthew chapter 10. He's quoting Micah 7:6. And when you go look at Micah, and you look at Micah 4, we read, "The day God visits you has come, the day your watchmen sound the alarm. Now is the time of your confusion." They are confused. They're confused because, unlike us, they have a communal identity that is rooted in the family, that is rooted in a national identity, that is rooted in the land itself. And Jesus is turning that on its head. He is challenging them in their identity of what they're committed to, who they are. And he's beginning to reorient them. And we read in Micah 7:7, this is after the passage he just quoted, we read, "But as for me, I watch and hope for the Lord. I wait for God, my Savior. My God will hear me." And God did come, he did hear, and he is saving, and he's doing something far better than a national identity that's established in the land. It is going to be much bigger than that. Much bigger than that. But they need to reorient themselves into what Jesus is getting at. And I love the way that N.T. Wright puts it in his book, Jesus and the Victory of God. Wright is responding to passages like these where Jesus is really challenging people. And he says the only explanation for Jesus' astonishing command is that he envisioned loyalty to himself and his kingdom movement as creating an alternative family, period. This is something that I find a lot of people in the church don't appreciate. That when you come through those doors and when you come in together, church is obviously not about this building or these walls. It's about the family of God. He is calling you and I into a bigger and greater community. I like the way, Wright goes on to say, in a world where family identity counted for a good deal more than in today's individualized Western culture, the attitude Jesus was arguing would result in the disciple effectively denying his or her own basic existence. Now, when you think about that in comparison to today's culture, when Jesus gets after and he starts really challenging people with a family identity, that doesn't hit for us. We hear those passages and we're like, man, Jesus, you just sound angry. It doesn't even make any sense. They understood exactly what he was doing. He was challenging their identity. I think the passages that tend to hit us a little harder is when Jesus tells us to take up our cross and to follow him. When Jesus challenges us to die to ourselves. I love the way that Paul puts that in Philippians chapter 2 when he calls us to crucify our selfish ambition and our vain conceit, to die to ourselves. That we might start to see the bigger picture about what this is all about. You see, and I think that the confusion can even be identified with how we explain the gospel. I mean, how often do we tell people that they need to have a personal relationship with God? And that's true, But that resonates with us in this very individualized, culture of individualism. We like that gospel. That gospel makes sense to us. But what doesn't ring in our ears is the idea that you and I have been not only saved into a personal relationship with God, we've been saved into a communal relationship with God. That it's not one or the other, it's both. That this is what Jesus is doing is he calls us to be the family of God. That we are being called into a much bigger picture. There's an excellent book by Joseph Hellerman called When the Church Was a Family. I highly recommend it. He says, in a social setting where each and every person found his identity in the group to which he belonged, a call to leave one's primary group, the family, in order to follow an individual would make sense only if following that individual meant joining his group. Man, I think to myself, what are we asking people when they come into our churches? What are we establishing them into? How are we challenging their identity, but what identity are we giving to them? What kind of gospel identity are we preaching? I don't want to be rude, but we clearly aren't doing a good job if people keep asking us if a Christian needs to go to church. You're missing the point. I mean, that's what a Christian does. A Christian is one who is committed to community with God and community with each other. That's what it means to be a Christian. Of course, that word Christ is the word, it's Greek is Christo, but it's the word for Messiah, and Messiah means king. It's not a name, it's a title, thanks. It's not a name, it's a title. It's King Jesus. That's what a Christian is. A Christian is one who finds themselves under the authority of King Jesus. But Jesus isn't our monarch. He's much more than that. He's our Father. Or Jesus isn't. Jesus is calling us into the family of God in that we have a heavenly Father. I mean, have you ever thought about Jesus' sermon, Matthew chapter 5 to 7, which we often call it the Sermon on the Mount, but I think it should be more aptly titled the Identity Sermon. From beginning to end, Jesus is just talking about identity. And in the middle, in Matthew chapter 6, he tells people, this is how you pray. Now, when he tells us how to pray, does he say, this is how you should pray? My Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. He doesn't do that, does he? When you read the prayer, the entire prayer is in the plural. It's communal. Our Father who art in heaven. It is about forgive us our debts, that we might forgive one another. It is a call to being a part of the family. And man, one of the passages of Scripture that just challenges me deeply is Ephesians chapter 2, verses 11 to 18, in which the Apostle Paul says, listen, remember that formerly you who are Gentiles by birth, that would be many of us, and called uncircumcised by those who call themselves the circumcision, which is done in the body by human hands. Remember that at that time you were separated from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenant of the promise, without hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commandments and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace. Man, I'm like, what a beautiful message that honestly the world needs to hear, don't they? We live in a culture that is at war with itself. We are living in a world that literally is at war as well in the Middle East. We are living in a time that is desperate for peace. And we were called to be that ambassador of peace. That people might see in us that the dividing wall has been torn down and there is unity in Christ as one family and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross by which he put to death their hostility. He came and preached peace to you who were far away and peace to those who were near. For through him we both have access to the Father by one Spirit. Man, that is a challenging word. Because I'm telling you, you know when that is really challenging? That word is challenging on Sunday morning when you're getting up and you're deciding whether or not it's worth it to get your kids out of bed and get them dressed and to go through everything you need to do, right, to come to church. And I can just imagine Jesus. I've had this moment where I'm like, Andy, Jesus is preaching peace to you. Don't put that wall back up. Don't come up with reasons why community doesn't matter or you don't need it. Your church is work or whatever it might be. Man, I actually had this conversation last night with my son. Tristan, he's 16. He had a bunch of homework. And this was a good moment to talk about what church is. And he's like, I don't know if I can make it to youth tonight, Dad. And I was saying to him, I go, Tristan, you know community's important, right? He's like, yeah. And I go, listen, there are going to be times in your life where things are going to get in the way, and you're going to have to decide what you're going to do in any given situation. I'm not calling you to legalism. But it was this moment with my son, was just trying to explain to him that in your life, you're going to need to be committed to something. And the Bible's calling you to be committed to community. Committed to your relationship with God and committed to your relationship with people, that matters. It must have worked, by the way, because he went to youth, okay? But it was one of those moments, and honestly, parents and pastors, we need to have these moments where we help to instruct people of what church actually is. It's not some sort of legalism. It's not some sort of rules that, you got to do this. But as we're going to get into, it's a heart posture of who am I, what is the identity I have, and how does it actually affect the decisions I make in my life. So why church? I think Jesus is clearly explaining to us that why church is because Jesus died to give us a new identity as the family of God. The answer is family. You and I are a family. We are brothers and sisters in Christ, that we have been invited into, we've been adopted into the kingdom, that you and I have a wonderful hope because of him, as he has broken down that division, that you and I might have community with one another through him, and that you and I might experience the kind of flourishing that we were always intended for. The kind of community that is actually established, and you see this in what Paul's preaching, is established in the identity of God himself. That God is one. Now that is a beautiful reality when we think about the Trinity, that God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God is a family in essence. God is communal in nature, and God is calling us to be that kind of community. The kind of community that loves one another. The kind of community that is united together. The kind of community that looks like God, in whose image you and I have been made in. This is the kind of church that you and I have been called to. But it requires that we firmly establish our identity in him and in the family. Now, I was talking to somebody recently, and they were talking about Timothy Keller. Keller was interviewed shortly before he died, and they asked him if you could go back, and if there was one thing that you would really focus in on in your ministry, what would it be? And his answer was identity. I'd probably spend more time on the topic of identity. I love what he says, by the way. Keller says this: Christians are not people who are just trying to be better people. Christians are people who get a new identity. We get a new identity in Christ, one that is established in community. And as I've thought about that topic of community And as I've thought about my own identity and what I am committed to, I'm reminded of an experience I had a couple years ago. As Crystal was saying, we have this new series out called Branded, a series on identity, and we got some grant funding to film this for young people, that they would think through what their identity is rooted in. And one of the illustrations that we used was dog sledding. So we went to Revelstoke, and for 2 days, they taught us how to be mushers. It was quite the experience. And when we got there, I didn't realize that dog mushing isn't something that they allow tourists to do. Tourists are allowed to sit in the sled. They're not allowed to drive the sled. And it took 2 days of them working with us for them to build up the confidence to allow us to drive the dog sled. And when we got there, I didn't understand why that was until they gave us our first lesson. And we were there with this dog musher who lived in the middle of nowhere, British Columbia. And this guy was the one that uses dogs daily. And he's like, I need to explain to you the musher's motto, is what he called it. This is the key to being a dog musher. And if you are going to do this with us over the next 2 days, you have to be committed to this. And we're like, okay, what is that? And he grabbed hold of the sled, and he said, you can never let go of this sled. And we're like, okay. And I didn't understand this, and maybe you don't know this as well, but we were like, okay, why do we have to hold on to the sled? And he says, because these dogs love to run so much that if you fall off, they're not stopping for you. They're going to keep on going. And then he goes, and if you live like I do in the middle of nowhere, your life is in danger. You will be left behind. You will be left in the wilderness alone. You need to hold on. But that wasn't the main reason. He then went on to explain, but the main reason that you must hold on is because these dogs love to run so much, they will run right off a cliff. They will run until they get tangled up. They will run until they die. You have to hold on to this sled, not only for your safety, but for theirs. And as he was preaching, as he was teaching this, and I'm thinking he's preaching here, it immediately just made me think about identity. I mean, that is like the essence of what identity is. Identity is that thing that you are holding on to desperately and you are not going to let go of. Let me ask you, what is that thing that you are holding on to? What is that thing in your life that you are absolutely committed to? You're hell and high water, you're going to hold on to that no matter what. And at one point, when we were learning to sled, it flipped over on its side, and those dogs kept trying to go, and I just remember just keep holding on, because even when you go around corners, they don't slow down. They don't slow down for anything. And as magical as this is, they don't even stop to go to the bathroom. Just think about that one. You have to hold on. And as I've thought about that, I've thought about what is it that I'm committed to? And Jesus is calling us to an identity that is holding on to relationship with God and relationship with each other, a kind of identity that will not let go. In our culture today, we are ready to let go at a moment's notice to community. Because unfortunately, we are often much more concerned about our identity that's rooted in ourselves than anything else. That tends to be the thing that we're holding on to desperately. And again, I just can imagine Jesus preaching peace to you and to me, saying, I've called you to so much more than that. What I'd like to do as we just continue along here is I want to just explain to you, there are many directions I could go tonight. I could go in 100 different directions, and they would all be great. But I want to just share with you more personally, as I think about what it means to be committed to God and to community. Here are just a few of the things that are important in my life. And I think is what it ultimately means to be a Christian, is that we are holding on to this, that I'm not going to let go of. And the first one is we are called to discipleship. We are called to hold on to discipleship with that kind of death grip that does not let go. The kind of grip that says, I am willing to die to myself. I am willing to put others' needs above my own because I'm that committed to community. And how about this? Discipleship, by the way, that word just means student. A person that followed a rabbi, a teacher, was a disciple. You and I, as Christians, are Jesus' students. And so it challenges us to ask, am I being a good student? Am I allowing Jesus to teach me? And here is something that I think a lot of us struggle with, a lesson that God wants to teach us, a lesson that Jesus wants to teach us, is that he is going to use other people in your life to teach you lessons that you will not be able to learn any other way. How are you going to learn? How are you going to be taught by him if you are not in community? You see, and this might be a hard lesson to learn, but there are going to be people in your life that you are going to watch suffer. And they are going to teach you about the heart of God and his love through their life. And there might be those times, and there will be, in which you are going to suffer. And you will have the opportunity in those moments to teach others what it looks like to be committed to community, what it looks like to love God, what it looks like to love people. But are you committed to that journey of allowing God to use people in your life to teach you? You know, I had a really powerful moment in this church one Sunday. I was preaching a message. I'm sure it was amazing. And at least I was hoping it was amazing, because right about there, where Christina is, was John Neufeld, Pastor John, Dr. John Neufeld from Back to the Bible. And I'm like, man, I hope I did my homework right this Sunday, right? He was one of my teachers back in the day, and I really appreciate John. And I saw him there, and after the service, I went up to him and I talked to him and I said, John, I go, how did I do, man? Like, critique my sermon sort of thing. I really did this. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, Andy, I don't come to church to critique the preacher. I come so that the Holy Spirit could speak through you so that he can critique me. And that was just like, John, you're still teaching me, like, that was so humbling. I don't know if you've ever had to do something in front of somebody you really admire and respect, but that was one of those moments where I was like, man, the family of God is so amazing that God could use me to be a blessing in John's life, as John has been a blessing in my life so many times. It was humbling and beautiful that you and I can have that kind of impact in each other's lives. When I would say my identity as a Christian was probably challenged at its most, and I know there's some young pastors here right now, so I want you to really perk up and take note of this. A few years ago, as Crystal was saying, I worked here for, I think it was 8 years, Crystal, but maybe it was 7, somewhere around there. It's a blur. I was here for a number of years. I love this church dearly. And it was just clearly time that I needed to go back to Apologetics Canada full time. And I stopped pastoring here, and I began to attend here as a congregant. And I still do to this day. Like I said, I love this church. But I'm telling you, young pastors, it was so hard. It was so difficult because so much of my identity had been built around being a pastor. I know, Mark, you stopped for a bit of pastoring and went to C2C. Did you experience that too? Yeah. It's hard because now all of a sudden you have to think about, why am I going to come to church this morning? I don't have to. And am I going to keep coming? How committed am I to church? And particularly, is being going to church, is it about me being a pastor and people seeing me as a pastor? Or am I here because this is who I am in Jesus and I want to be a part of the family? I tell you, it's easier said than done, but it's a journey, that one of those moments where we have to really rethink what we're building our identity on. I decided to Google Donald Miller because I knew he did that blog post, and I wondered, did he do any follow-up from that blog post? Because it got a lot of attraction, a lot of heat. And he did. He did a video. And in the video, he said a couple things I think are really interesting. And again, he's not my whipping boy. I think he's being honest, and these are things that I've encountered too. But he gave a couple reasons why he doesn't like to go to church. And here was one of them. He said, people often talk to me at church and try to take me out for coffee. And I'm like, yep. And they can sometimes be awkward. Yeah, people can be. I can be awkward. You can be awkward. And people will talk to you, yeah. And people might even want to go out for coffee, and they might even want to go out for lunch, and they might even want to have you over for dinner. And it's one of those things that you have to really start to think about, what am I really committed to here? Because that's what family's like. I don't know what your family gatherings are like, but mine can be a little challenging at times. But that's just the reality of life when we're living together and we're loving each other, and God's going to use those people, and it was a hard one, God's going to use those people to teach you. I had this just the other day. I was at somebody's house, and man, they blessed me, deeply blessed me, and I'm like, I didn't see that coming. Well, you won't unless you're willing to be committed to community and allowing God to use people, even the most unlikely people. But I'm telling you right now, God's also going to use you to bless them. If I could just take a moment just to say something here that I absolutely love about being a Christian, and I love about coming to church. And I love coming to church. I love being a part of the family of God. And one of the things that I love about it is that I have the opportunity to pour into people like I did this summer. I was a young adults pastor for many, many years, so I'm going to be doing weddings till the day I die, okay? And I remember I did a wedding this summer, and it was just such a blessing to get a pour into this couple. I knew both of them. I had the privilege of pastoring both of them. And you know what? That young man was my son's school teacher. And I'm like, this is the beauty of the church. That young man encouraged my son amazingly in science at school. He loved him. And I'm like, he's blessing my family, and I've had the privilege of blessing his family. This is what it looks like to be a part of the church. This is what it looks like to be a part of a community. One of the other things that Miller wrote about the difficulty of going to church, does this one relate? He disagrees with the teaching from time to time. There are going to be people that are going to say things that you're not necessarily going to agree with. And that's okay. You know, when I worked here at Northview, us pastors didn't agree on everything. Yes, we were in full agreement on close-handed gospel issues, yes. And we had the freedom to disagree with each other on open-handed issues, and we did. And that was normal, good, and healthy. That's what a family's like. We are committed to the core teaching, and we are free to disagree on those open-handed theological playground questions, as I like to put it. But you know what? At Apologetics Canada, our staff, we don't agree on everything. I have never worked at a church where we all agreed on everything. It just doesn't exist. And that's okay, because when we get to heaven, everybody will find out that I was right. See, that's the thing. It takes some humility, doesn't it, to realize I might and I probably am wrong on a number of things. And that's okay. Third one he said is authoritative confidence. Kind of goes in line with this. Authoritative confidence. And the reality is we do need to be confident about the Bible and trusting the Bible. And I am thankful for the confidence that is preached at my church as we place our authority in God's word. And again, there are those moments where we need to be careful, particularly in this. Pastors, I particularly want to challenge you on this. That we need to make sure that our confidence, though, is in the gospel, in those core issues that we are uncompromising in. And I'm reminded of 2 Timothy chapter 1, where Paul tells Timothy to fan the gospel into flame. And the question I'm always asking myself is, am I fanning the gospel into flame, or am I making something in the gospel to fan into flame? We need to be very careful that we are fanning the gospel into flame. Now, lastly, and then I'll leave Miller alone. In the end of his video, he said something very interesting that I have heard over and over again. He said that he's thinking he's going to come back to church. And why is that? Well, because of his daughter. He realizes that his daughter needs the church. The challenge is he hasn't realized that he needs the church. I have seen this so many times where people will have left the church, they'll get married, have kids, and be like, you know what? My kids need some good moral teaching, right? That I need to get them over to church and get them straightened up, sort of idea. And I love that, though, because they'll come and they'll realize that God has a word for them, right? And they can begin to realize, no, this isn't just about what my child needs. This is about what I need. Am I willing to be committed to this? Now think about how this works, by the way. If you want a great church for your son like mine to go and be invested into, it goes both ways, right? It goes both ways. See, this is the problem with our individualism. We tend to want to come and receive, but we tend to not want to come and to give. But church is about both giving and receiving, that these two things come together, that this is what community actually looks like. And this is why I would say that one of the things that I am committed to as a Christian, or that we are called to serve. That we are called to serve. One of the things that I have received and my family has received over the years, particularly in being like places here at Northview, is an opportunity to take my kids to the kids ministry, to take my kids to youth, the Bible studies, and all of these other amazing things, but they just don't happen on their own. We have to invest for the community to work. We have to be a part of that serving if we are going to be recipients of it. Now, I said some other stuff on it, so I'm going to move on past that one. I want to move to this next one. I have two more that I want to look at. We are called to accountability. We are called to accountability. You know, this is a big one for me. My time in church ministry, I have seen so many pastors that have disqualified themselves from ministry over the years. And I remember asking myself early on as a young pastor, how can I avoid that? I don't want to go down that path. Realized early on that accountability was absolutely essential. Accountability in my relationship with the Lord, accountability in my relationship with other people. My wife and I put in various levels of accountability with the way that I interacted with other people, particularly females. Also, the way that I interacted online. And one of the biggest ones that I'm highlighting here is my commitment to being a part of a church family in which I am under a leadership, and that people can speak into my life, that people can help me, but also that people can challenge me. And that this accountability is something that is absolutely essential, that I think sometimes is really missed on us leaders, particularly us pastors. And now, for me, I think about this a lot as a ministry organizational leader. I'm running an apologetics ministry, and if you've watched anything that's gone on in the news in the last couple of years, there's been some pretty famous people that have taken some pretty big falls. And do you know what's come out over and over again when I see these different legends of the faith fall? I've seen this so many times that you'll see that so-and-so didn't attend church. So-and-so wasn't committed to a church community. They thought they were above church. And this was one of those things where I've realized that accountability is absolutely essential, and that we need to put those safeguards in place, and that these are things, again, that we're holding on to, we're not going to let go of, and that we're committed to that journey of accountability. Pastors, this is something that I think is sometimes difficult for us to fully appreciate, because we tend to be the accountability to other people. It can be easy for us to realize that we need accountability, that we need to make sure that we too are under leadership, and that we are not above reproach. That we're above reproach, but we're not above being challenged and questioned. Now, lastly, the one I want to speak to, and I think that this is one of the most important issues, and that is that we are called to real relationship. What I want to say now, I think, is quite significant. Not to say that what we haven't talked about already hasn't been, but when I take the crystal ball, if you will, and I'm looking into the years ahead, what are the challenges that are coming? Now, clearly, I don't know what's ahead, but what the strong indication that I get is that we're in for some challenging times. And the area that I think is going to be this question that we're dealing with tonight, why church, I think is going to be one of the most important questions of our time. Now, I know it might sound a little over dramatic, but I don't think that it is. Because I think that the question that is core to what we are wrestling with and are going to be wrestling with ever so more is this question of real relationship. And as I talk about this, I'll kind of develop that a little bit more. Jesus says in Matthew 6:19-21, do not store up for yourself treasures in heaven. Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store for yourself treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So the question, of course, is what is heavenly treasure? What is the kind of treasure that moth and vermin can't destroy? And what you see and what Jesus is preaching through that entire identity sermon is community, relationship, loving God and loving people. As Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 at the end, now we have these three things, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. Why is that? I think it's greater because when you die, you don't need your faith anymore and your hope is fulfilled, and the only thing you have remaining is the love in which you've lived this life. Community, relationships, people are eternal. So invest in those things that are eternal, our relationships with one another. This, however, is very difficult for us. It's very difficult for us to appreciate just how important community is. You know, Genesis begins by God creating the heavens and the earth and creating humanity, and says that it's not good for man to be alone. But do we really believe that? Like, have we thought about how significant that idea of loneliness is? One of my favorite TV shows, by the way, to watch is a TV show called Alone. It is actually started being filmed here in British Columbia on Vancouver Island. What they do is they take a handful of people and they drop them off in the middle of the wilderness with 10 items, and they say the last one standing wins. And you have a button to call to give up. and then it's the last one. And what's interesting is you've got like this Maslow's hierarchy of needs going on, right? Where you're like, okay, I need a shelter, and you get a shelter, and I need some food, and you get some food, and you begin to work your way up the hierarchy of needs. And what you find that is at the top isn't self-actualization. What's at the top? Community. Every single one of these contestants will tap out because of loneliness. It's just a matter of time. Who can bear it the longest? Community, relationship is absolutely essential to the core of who we are as people. So when God calls you and I into community as the church, it's because God knows that this is not only what we were created for, this is what's going to lead to our good. But yet we fight God on this. And as a culture, we are going down some incredibly lonely paths. Just 3 days ago, a new study was released. And that study, which was taken across 142 countries, it found that 24% of people age 18 and older self-reported feeling very or fairly lonely in response to the question, how lonely do you feel? The survey also found that the rate of loneliness were highest in young adults, with 27% of young adults ages 19 to 29 reporting very or fairly lonely. In other words, around the world is an epidemic of loneliness in which 1 out of 4 is experiencing loneliness. And again, I can't help but feel, have we done a good job at explaining? I mean, this is what church was meant to address, this very issue, community. One of the things that I often would do as a young adults pastor is, man, the gospel we would preach would be come to community group, because in community group, you're going to get introduced to people, and we're going to introduce you to Jesus. But what's interesting is the reason I call it like preaching or gospel is I'm saying their immediate felt need is relationship. They just don't realize how deep that need goes. And we have the opportunity to not only invite them into it, we have the opportunity, first of all, to model what it looks like, to be the people of God that live in relationship with God and with one another as we call people into that. One of the challenges, though, that I'm seeing that we face is oftentimes we've, again, lost sight of what church is, and we've made it into something less real. I call this, in fact, I didn't come up with this. A young adult was over at our house having dinner with my wife and I. She called it Hallmark Christianity. She was going to a church in Chilliwack, and she said, Andy, the church that I go to, is one where you have to put on a smile to go to church on Sunday. Where it feels like everybody's singing the theme song, Everything is Awesome, from Lego. But she's a school teacher, and she's like, everything is not awesome. Life is really hard, and I'm going through some really difficult challenges in my life. And I need the kind of community that I can come to and be real. Listen, people need real community. They don't need a church that they have to put on a face. They need one that they can be honest about what's actually going on in their lives. And the kind of culture that you and I are living right now, it's really challenging. And we don't need to hide from that and pretend like everything's awesome. But allow people to be real and to actually come alongside them and provide assistance. And sometimes that's just a matter of letting them cry. Sometimes it's just a matter of hearing them out as you're walking with them through some challenges. Here's the big one, though, that I think that pastors, and congregants, we really need to think deeply about. I was just in Texas speaking on the topic of artificial intelligence, and then I was in Winnipeg, and I got back yesterday speaking on the same thing. And we are in the midst of an AI revolution right now. It is taking off, and it's happened a lot faster than we thought it would. And it is bringing challenges with it that we need to be aware of. When I was speaking down in Houston after the talk I gave, a young man came to me. I guess he's not too young. He serves in the Navy. He's in his 20s. And he said, Andy, you wouldn't believe how many people in the military right now have a digital girlfriend. And I said, what is that? He said, Andy, they have a girlfriend that is AI, that they curate to their liking, and that they spend their day texting with. Wired magazine just released this week that social media platforms like Snapchat that are behind a lot of this tech just released a audio version of a digital girlfriend so that now you can be in a talking relationship. Where a lot of this is coming from is through influencers, such as a popular one is Karen AI, where this girl who has this huge online following has allowed AI to sift through all of her videos and her content so that it can capture her vocabulary, mannerisms, and can replicate her kind of talk or conversation so that for a fee, people can have a digital relationship with her. You could have her as your girlfriend. If you don't think that this is going to have a profound impact on our society, you're being very naive. We are seeing the influence this is having already. Beyond digital girlfriends, we're already seeing, particularly in the United States, things like Twitch and others are absolutely captivating, where this young man told me, Andy, these days it is very hard to get somebody in the military on their time off to go to the beach or for a bike ride or to just go hang out. They would much rather just go on their device. And the other digital medium that's also going to be really challenging is virtual chat rooms are going to be a big challenge in the future. And the reason I'm bringing this up is we are going to need to be more clear than ever about why church and what church is about and the importance of community, because there's a lot of money being put in tech right now to capture people's attention and to convince them that this tech can provide them all the community that they need. It doesn't have to be real relationship, it can be artificial relationship. And the amount of loneliness that we're already seeing is just going to get worse. I think it's just going to get worse. By the way, I'm not a pessimist, I'm always optimistic. To me, this is an opportunity for the gospel. This is an opportunity to invite people into community. I have seen so many people come to faith recently. I have had so many conversations with people that have come to faith, and it's been very interesting to see how it's happened. In fact, I talk about this, and I feel sometimes people are like, I wonder if he's telling the truth. So I recorded a podcast with one couple. You can take a look at it. It's on the AC podcast. It just launched today. And I just asked this young couple, they just celebrated 1 year being Christians, and I said, just explain to me how you became a Christian, and what the church means to you. And I had them just explain, what they thought, because neither of them had ever stepped foot in a church. And so I just said, tell me what you saw, what you thought, what was most impactful. And one of the things I've heard over and over again, and they said the same thing, I thought it was very interesting, greeters, absolutely key. Why? Because they felt welcomed into a community, that they experienced relationship. One of the other things I thought was interesting is they really appreciated the worship. They really appreciated the worship. They really appreciated the sermon. They really appreciated, I thought this was interesting, the fidelity to the Bible. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. But here are just three reasons I saw people come to faith just recently in some conversations. One guy I was talking to, because of how much evil he's seen in the world, he became convinced there must be good, and he decided to go look for what that good was, and it brought him to One guy I met him at Willingdon. I was doing a talk out there, and afterwards he came up to me. This is the first time he had built up the courage to come to church. Vancouver is often called the loneliest place, one of the loneliest cities in the world. And he was an absolute example of this. He had spent so much time alone, and he finally came to this place where he thought, I should give community a try, so he came to church. And he is continuing to come to church. And then I met a couple who during COVID have lost all of their family. Not only, we often think it's like culture against Christianity, but it's a culture just divided, not only against, society against itself, but families ripped apart from one another, and they were left with nothing. And they were looking for a family, a community, and they came to church. They've never set foot in a church before. And my prayer to you and my encouragement to you is I pray that when they come into our churches, that they aren't asking why, that they understand immediately that this is family and they are invited and they are a part of the family and they have a wonderful hope in a God who loves them so much that he would transcend heaven to earth to die for them, to bring them and adopt them into that family, and that they experience that community. They get a taste of heaven on earth right here, and that we can walk with them through some challenging times. So I'm going to close, and then we'll have some time for some Q&A, but I want to just close off with some scripture. I want to close with Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 to 6. Pray that this encourages you as it's encouraged me. As a prisoner for the Lord, then I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father over all, who is over all and through all and in all. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah.
That was rich. I had a question all crafted to start us off. I crafted about 20 minutes ago. You just answered it.
Okay.
And that question was, how does the fact that we are family inform the ways we do evangelism? You already answered that. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I could just put a exclamation point on that, I think in our churches, especially if it's a big church, you're gonna have to work harder to make those family moments and think through, okay, what kind of community groups do I have? Where are those located? And how accessible are those? And what are we doing to constantly on-ramp people into community? Yeah.
Good. All right, so you've got the number on the screen. Please send in your questions. Question number 2, the forms of how we do church shape us. What forms would you say are barriers, and what forms draw us deeper into the experience of family?
Yeah, some might disagree with me on this, but here's my hot take on that. I think sometimes, if we're not careful, we can get a little rigid and legalistic in the way that we do things, and sometimes we can start to think that church is about some sort of formula, that we must have worship, we must have preaching, we must do these things, and then that's a church. But I would love for us to kind of rethink and go, well, maybe we should be asking, what about the community? What have we done for community and opportunities to learn more about each other, to be able to interact with each other? This is something that even for myself that I have to be cognizant of. Like when I come to church, it's easy to just walk in, grab a seat, sing some songs, hear a sermon, and then jump out to my car and be on my way. But what am I doing? Because like just a couple Sundays ago, I saw somebody that I knew just got out of heart surgery, right? And so I was like, okay, I want to make a beeline for that individual and be like, man, how are you doing? How can we continue to pray for you? I think these are things where we have to rethink, okay, how do I think like a family? If we're honest with ourselves, I think individualism has crept in deeper into the church and into us than we would care to admit.
I find people love the idea of community, but leave when it gets messy or have been jaded by something in the past. How do we help people to hold on to the sled?
Yeah, and that's why I like to use that sled analogy, because I did not grow up in a Christian family. I grew up in a really messy family, and the way that my family works is as soon as you upset me, I am gone, right? I'm leaving, and I'm not talking to you, sort of thing. I think we have to appreciate that we're going to have people in our midst that don't know how to be in relationship. And in some regards, we have to kind of teach them. You know, we got to teach them what it looks like to be a part of a community and what it looks like to reconcile. How do we make things right when something goes wrong? And that we're a part of that reconciliation process. I mean, that's ultimately what church discipline is. How do we do reconciliation? How do we do it well? And it's something though that we've got to model. We got to participate in that, and even asking ourselves, how am I doing that in my own family? I can't help but wonder if that's one of the reasons why, the qualifications of an elder is, how are you doing in your own family if you're going to help the bigger family? And so I can't help but ask myself, okay, am I doing well in my family, and how can I help to do that in the church family? It does mean as leaders that there are times that you're going to be hurt, and you're going to need to be able to have the humility to use that as a teaching opportunity. I remember once I was leading a missions trip, and somebody got really cranky and angry and feisty, and literally wanted to have like a fight with me, and it was a very awkward situation. And I remember thinking, okay, God, I'm angry, and rightfully so. It was pretty bizarre, but it was like, okay, God, but how can we use that as an opportunity to disciple and reconcile? And amazingly, that relationship was restored, and it was one of those moments. I know it doesn't always go that way, but they're hard to do. But I think if we're committed to it, if we're holding on to the sled, if you will, I think that God can use those as incredible teaching moments.
I've got a whole bunch of really good questions coming in, and we've got about 30 minutes, so
3 minutes.
We'll see.
We have 30 or
30. We have up to 30 minutes.
Oh, great. Sorry,
I'm
seeing the countdown wrong.
You ended early.
Okay, good.
So you said, why church? Because Jesus died to give us a new identity as a family of God. Some have said that if we are a family doesn't disassociate or excommunicate each other. How do we live into all that it means to be the family of God and hold to the core, close-fisted convictions together? And then they added, to clarify, what do we do when a family member, a church or a member of the body, disagrees and doesn't believe the core stuff anymore?
Yeah. Again, here would be my take on that. And I'm going to start with my own family. I believe as a husband and a father, one of the most important roles that I have is to make sure that my house is a sanctuary, that it is it's a safe place. And it means that I don't just invite anybody into my house, and I won't let just anybody stay in my house, because I am there to care for and steward my wife and my children. I do believe that there are times that we have to steward the sanctuary of the community. We have to make sure that we're doing a good job making sure that we are doing as best we can for healthy community in our churches. So, for example, we had a policy that I would often do, that we would have one challenging person per community group, that we wouldn't overload somebody that needed a little extra grace. We wouldn't just put them all on one person, right? Or we wouldn't, we would do a good job to spread that out, because we wanted to be careful not to burn people out, sort of thing. And I also had moments where people disqualified themselves from community. And I said, okay, listen, I'm pulling you out of community because you've done this, this, and this. And now you've made this an unsafe community. But you can do this, this, and this to get back into community. It's up to you. And I think this is part of what it looks like to be a leader as we are stewarding community. That would be some of my thoughts. One of the things that I think is really interesting about that, I never really had it go bad. People are so used to, especially in Canadian polite culture, to nobody saying anything, that they had just never heard somebody go, hey, you know what you did was rude and disrespectful, but I'm going to help you to see how to not be rude and disrespectful. And they actually appreciated that.
Often there are socioeconomic factors that are preventing people from community and belonging. What might the church do to address the increasing demand on individuals to be clogs in an economic system that demands more production?
What was the first part of that?
Yeah, often there are socioeconomic factors preventing people from community and belonging.
I mean, I'm not sure that there is. Because I think about Northview, for example. I love that this church provides a Saturday service and a Sunday service. So it's like, okay, if you're working on Sunday, you can come out on Saturday. Or what's stopping you from being a part of a community group? I think, if I understand this question correctly, some people are, it sounds like they're saying some people are working really hard and they don't have time for community. But I would say, then you need to make time for community. And I can't think of how somebody would be working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, that wouldn't have time to make space for community. That's not to say, by the way, that there weren't times in my own life, especially when we had kids, that it wasn't a matter of socioeconomic. It was just a matter of there's only so many hours in the day, and things were insane for a period of time. I mean, that's life to me. But you're always asking, okay, I'm in this kind of season, but I can't stay in this kind of season. How do we get out of this into something that's more balanced, in which community now is a regular part of our lives, not to stay there? That would just be some of my thoughts.
Can you speak of how dehumanizing polarization is and the implications for the family of God? Can the church be engaged in polarization without being dehumanizing?
Yeah, this is a great question. Somebody was asking me this earlier and said that they might text it, so thanks for texting it in. We do live in a time of dehumanization where that is that it's easy to view somebody as like an object or an animal, to see them not fully human, right? That you begin to see them as something less than. And right now we're living in a culture of division, in which we're polarized on a number of different issues. It's one of the reasons why I often that I was saying with regards to our culture, that it's not like it's culture against Christianity. It's like everybody's against everybody right now. It's a culture that's fractured in 1,000 different ways. And so we particularly are seeing that politically, though, where we are divided. And when we look at each other politically, we want to see each other as something less than, where we're not seeing the humanity of the other, which really, when you see the humanity, is when you have compassion and love. But when you don't see the humanity, you will not have compassion and love. And I don't know if you guys saw this, but just last week, a poll came out in the United States, and I would anticipate it'd be similar in Canada. But the poll in the United States showed that the U.S. is divided right down the middle politically, and that as the two sides are looking at each other, they are both equally justifying violence against the other. You can Google it. And that's concerning. And why I think one of the reasons why you're seeing that is because we're not seeing each other, right? We will see a caricature of the other, and then it creates more walls, more division. So I think as a Christian, one of the things that we're constantly doing is making sure that we're not getting caught up in the culture war, but that we are seeing each other correctly as made in the image of God, and with a heart of compassion towards how can I introduce you to Jesus? So in other words, not putting up more walls. But that would be just some quick thoughts that I think we all have to think about, and especially as we have elections coming in both the United States and in Canada.
How should we contend with the Catholic claim that they offer the opportunity to encounter Jesus Christ really, substantially, and truly in the Eucharist?
Do you know, that's a bigger topic, but one thing that I think's interesting about this question is we have seen a movement of people that want a more traditional service, I've seen people really leaning more and more towards Anglican and even Catholicism. And I can't help but wonder, what's going on there? Where one of the things that I see is a culture that is wanting something that's deeper and real, where there is a lot of health and wealth sort of services that are going on. I know when I lived in California, I thought, man, this is going to be so great living in LA. There are so many great churches to choose from, and it was actually very difficult to find a great church that was deep and loved the Lord and was committed to the Word. And it was very easy to find ones that were flashy with their worship and flashy with their messages, but of no substance whatsoever. And so I can't help but feel, though, that a lot of that angst and pull is because people are wanting more. And I think it's important for us as churches to be noticing what's going on there and making sure, that we're not falling into that same trend. I think it can be easy for us. If we think that church is just about filling seats, then we're going to, okay, well, if I preach like this, or if I have this kind of music, or I do it this way, okay, then we could get more people in here. If we start thinking like that, we've missed the point, right? The driving force should be community. And what does that look like with relationship with God and relationship to one another? So that would be a little bit of my response to that. With regards to the Eucharist or communion, think about this one for just a moment, okay? Because I think this is a prime example. For the longest time, I came to church and I didn't know what communion was about, especially coming from a non-Christian family. I just thought, okay, this is that part of the service where they pass out a little bit of juice to everybody that was super tasty. Loved that juice, wanted more of it, as a kid, and that you'd get a little bit of a cracker, and that we would do this together, but I didn't understand what it was about. And it was interesting because, as I got older and I started reading the Bible, I'm like, hey, this is actually a family meal. And that the reason we do it the way we do it is just because of practicality, but it's a family meal. And so I think sometimes even, in the church, we can get caught up with this is how we do things, and we forget what we're even doing and what it actually means. And making sure that we're explaining this to people, especially in a post-Christian culture. People coming through our doors have no idea what they're seeing. They have no idea what they're seeing. And we need to make sure that we're explaining it and that we're explaining it correctly.
How would you respond to people who say their relational needs could theoretically be met digitally? Why is real relationship so important?
Yeah, thanks. One of the challenges with digital community and digital relationships is that it's inherently narcissistic. It is, if you don't remember the myth of Narcissus, he goes to a pool, sees his reflection in the pool, and he falls in love with himself. I think one of the challenges that we have with technology is that technology it's like a pond, but it's even better. It's like a mirror, but it's even better. It is able to reflect our image back to us in such a way that it gives us everything we want and asks of us nothing in return. And we absolutely love it. It feeds our individualism. It feeds our narcissistic tendencies for love of self. And this is one of those things where I'm like, man, the call of Christ to take up our cross and to follow him, I don't know that that's ever been more relevant of what does it look like to challenge my identity, my individualism, and to pull me out of that digital desire for more of me instead of more of Christ. If you haven't read, there's a great book by Sherry Turkle called Alone Together, and she's written a number of other books. I find it absolutely fascinating that you got people like Turkle and others who aren't even Christians, and they're going, hey, this probably isn't a good direction for us to go down. Maybe we probably shouldn't do that. But they don't even know why, right? They don't even have like a foundation that, community is probably important for these reasons. They're just like, okay, every study we see tells us that loneliness is worse. Honestly, a study came out in 2017. Loneliness is worse than smoking 17 cigarettes a day. Like, it's not only bad for you, like, spiritually, it's bad for you physically. And again, that artificial community that we're talking about here, it doesn't fill the void. It just leaves you longing. And so you have people that are, as she puts it, alone together. It's not a community that satisfies.
All right, we'll do 2 more questions. Now, for context, this one is accompanied by a GIF of a gentleman gleefully stirring a large pot.
Okay. Thank you for that.
You made the point that we are saved into the family of God, which is often understood to be the church. In exploring being part of the church or family of God, there was no mention of baptism. As MBs, we hold that baptism is a requirement for membership in the church. Would you say that one can be a part of the church without being baptized, or is one excluded from the family of God until they are baptized?
Oh, that's interesting. That question went in a different direction than I was thinking it was going to go in. Well, instead of, sorry, but I'm going to avoid the dilemma. If you'd like to come talk to me afterwards, you can. Let me just get at the first part of that question. I believe that baptism is an essential part of what the church is, in that you and I have a public demonstration of our identity in Jesus, in his death and in his resurrection, and that you and I are making that public confession that that individual is a part of the community. One of the things, though, yes, baptism is important. Of course, can you be a Christian without being baptized? Well, it would seem to me that yes, you can, such as the thief on the cross and whatever. We could talk about that, but it wouldn't make any sense, though, if we're talking in those kind of like hypotheticals. But it doesn't make any sense, though, if you have a Christian who's coming to church and doesn't want to get baptized. Then you start to ask the question, well, I don't know if you understand what it means to be a Christian. And here's what I want to push on us pastors in particular. It's very rare that I go to a church or I'm part of a church where I hear preaching on baptism and giving a call for baptism. And I've been thinking a lot about this because one of my sons is just going to get baptized. And it was interesting because for me, I had this moment as a pastor where I'm like, okay, the call for baptism doesn't happen very often. And I thought, okay, I need to just bring this up in my own family. And not to say that's a bad thing, but I'm like, I'm going to explain to my boys the importance of baptism and let them make that decision. But it is a conversation that doesn't happen a lot in the church. It's something that we do and that we celebrate, but I think that we need to teach more about and give an opportunity to respond.
I received a few questions along these lines. I can easily go to any mosque or Sikh temple or Buddhist temple and find community there. Someone also mentioned Girl Guides. You can find community there and a family. These are nice people in those organizations and a sense of belonging. Why would I want to come to your church? What's the advantage?
Well, first off, I think that this is a valid question in that sometimes I wonder if one of the reasons why it's been so hard for us to have any traction in Sikhs coming to faith is because they have such a solid family. If they were to leave that, I'm like, what do we have to offer them? We don't offer, like if you've ever done ministry where you're preaching to Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and Muslims and Sikhs, you don't understand the kind of community that they have. And one of the questions that they'll often ask is, what kind of community do you have? You see, I've met so many Mormons, for example, that don't think that what they're a part of is true. They just don't want to leave the community. And you have to ask, like, sometimes, I'm not trying to be a downer here, but sometimes we're not great at community. And so it's like, well, am I going to be able to leave that community, and am I going to have a new community, a new family? Man, my friends who have left Islam, like when they leave Islam, their family disowns them. And so they need the church. The church becomes their new family. And so that, I think, on the one hand, makes it really difficult for people to come to faith because we haven't done that part well, and we need to get better at it. But the other aspect of this, of course, is that we're talking about the way, the truth, and the life. We're talking about what is true and welcoming people into a relationship with God that's real and a God who they can actually know. One of the things that I find fascinating with some people is they will tend to want to impute a Christian worldview onto other religious worldviews. But these other religious worldviews are not the Christian worldview. They are, take Islam, for example. Islam doesn't have this view of the world of a God who loves them and is willing to die for them, that they might have a relationship with God. Islam has a view that you should try to do as little sinning as possible because one day Allah is going to judge your good and bad deeds, and if you've done enough good deeds, you can make it into a paradise. But it's not our understanding of heaven that we can be in right relationship with God, a God that we can legitimately refer to as our Father and have a relationship with God and a relationship with one another as a family. You are not going to find that in anything outside of Christianity. What you're going to find is a lot of rules and regulations of trying to do your very best that you might earn God's favor and either cease to exist if you're Buddhist. Nirvana means to snuff out like a candle. It means to cease to be. That's the goal. In all these other different worldviews, I could go through a number of them, but it's not the Christian worldview. It's not what we have, and we need to be careful that we're not imputing our view on them and saying, oh, they've got what we've got. They don't have what we have, and they need Jesus.
There we go. One last question. So you've responded to the question of why church. You just expressed a love, appreciation for the Mennonite brethren. Mm-hmm. So the second question that someone poses, why MB?
Oh, good question. Why MB? It's a good question. I grew up in a Baptist church, and that was when I came to Canada. It was interesting. I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to go to a Baptist church. I went to an EV-free church at first, and that's where I started serving. And then I ended up pastoring at an MB church, and then I pastored also at a Baptist church as well. And then I pastored again as an MB church. So I don't want to say that I'm MB only, because I'm not. Yeah. But I deeply, deeply love the MB church. And one of the things that I love about the MB Church is a couple things. One, it's got a deep heritage of being in exile. My wife is a Schellenberg, so I've gotten to understand the MB culture that has really spawned out of a people that have had to flee for their lives, and a people who, given their background, have a deep understanding for the needs of the outcast and the downtrodden and those that need help. And I tell you, when you look across Canada at those places that give the most per capita, it is always MB communities such as Abbotsford, Steiger, and others. The Mennonite community is an incredibly generous community that deeply loves people and puts that into action and has a deep humility that I have always loved. So that would be part of the reason why I love this denomination so much.
Super. Thank you very much.